What's going on, y'all? Welcome to Help Students Win the Teaching and Learning podcast. My name is Jordan Davis. I'm a professional speaker, faculty developer, and your podcast host. And today we have a very special guest in the virtual building, Mr. Dustin Miller. He is the Associate Director of Career Services for the School of Engineering and Applied Science team at the University of Pennsylvania. He's also the former Director of Student Life at Immaculata University and a former college football teammate of mine. We both played Division III college football at McDaniel College. So, Dustin, how you feeling, man? How's everything?
Hey, Jordan. No, I'm feeling great. Really excited for our conversation today. I appreciate you having me on the pod, and I'm doing well. The sun is shining. It's dropped about 10 degrees as it had earlier in the week when it was scorching. So I'm thankful for that and thankful to be joining you today.
Oh, man. Yeah. Thank you for being on. And I know how valuable the summer times are. I have a lot of admiration for people who do the work that you do, specifically in career services, but then also in student advising more generally, because I know folks who are in this work across higher ed, that fall semester from like September all the way till like November or really up until finals, it's just meetings on top of meetings with students. And like, I'm a processor. So I need that time in between meetings to like, all right, I'm gonna get myself together. I'm gonna go for a walk. I'm gonna drink some water. I know folks that do the work that you did are like meetings back to back to back. So like, what does that work look like for you? I guess we'll get to more of the particulars of your work, but what does the summer look like for you? Are you actually able to take some time to rest? Are you just like recovering from like the craziness of the academic year? Like, how do you like to spend your summers as a career services director?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the summer definitely offers some time to relax, recharge. We always talk about rejuvenating ourselves, preparing for that fall semester grind that you mentioned. It's definitely something that you have to prepare for because it is a little bit of a sprint during the semester. I will take some time. I've already had a chance to have a couple of days here and there. Most looking forward to the week down at the beach with my family, which is coming up here in the middle of July. So that's a good time to just kind of unplug, reset, recharge. But the work, I mean, it does continue. So we see students throughout the summer. Students are able to make appointments with us, which can usually be in the forms of helping them prepare for that fall recruitment season, which is quite busy, or maybe checking in about their current summer internships. And then outside of that, we're preparing for those career fairs. Career fair season comes hot and heavy for us in our office. We have a number of them in the month of September in particular, where it can get busy. And a lot of that, in addition, is just programs. We're getting ready for fall programming, deciding what kind of workshops and initiatives that we want to run, both as a team and as an office. So we definitely stay busy, but there is a time to recover from the academic year as we look forward to the next one as well.
Now I've got to ask you about that family trip. Is it a vacation or is it a family trip? There is an important distinction between vacations and family trips. Family trips is work still, and vacations is relaxation. You got to make that distinction for me.
Yeah, no, it is a true vacation. Absolutely. I'm very, very lucky, very blessed. I have a wonderful family. So my parents will be down there, joined by my siblings, their significant others, and then my fiance, Patricia, will be joining us. So it'll be the 8 of us. And there's no agenda, right? There's no pressure. We just kind of go with the flow. If some people want to go down onto the beach in the morning, great. If other people want to take their time, go get breakfast, come down later, and we'll do like some group dinners and things like that. But there is no agenda, which is the best part. And so I do view it as a true vacation. And there's some of my favorite people to be around. So it's a win-win for sure.
Well, that speaks a lot to the relationship you have with your parents, because anything with my parents is a trip. anything with my parents, there is a level of not non-relaxation that is required in order to be. And I love my parents, obviously, but that's super dope. Thank you for sharing. I know our time here is limited. Want to get into the conversation. I was actually reading a report from the National Science Foundation that talked about the state of the engineering workforce. And essentially, it showed that the number of U.S. citizens and permanent residents in the United States pursuing engineering degrees is on a slight decline, but the number of visa holders and international students who are going into the field of engineering is like skyrocketing. And I know you're at the University of Pennsylvania, a very culturally diverse campus, a lot of international students. Are you seeing those trends in the students that you work with at Penn, or are you seeing something a little bit different? When I share that statistic, what does that say to you?
I think it does. I think it rains home. It's something that we talk about. So at Penn, if we look at and we collect what's called first destination survey, which essentially tracks where students are going after they're completing their studies at Penn. And that's all students self-reported when we're getting that information. And financial services, consulting, those are, and investment banking, those are actually the top three industries that our students are going into after graduation. And I would say in the engineering world specifically, that's something that we think about. Is like, oh, like how are our engineers staying in engineering after they graduate? Is that something that they're still interested in doing? So from a Penn perspective, I would say that there is still a lot of popularity in engineering. However, it does fall behind those top three industries that I did mention. I will also say that while there might be that slight decline that you mentioned in that report from domestic students pursuing those opportunities, Penn's international student population, as you mentioned, specifically in some of the engineering programs, is quite high. It's actually a majority in a lot of the master's programs that we do have. And so I would say, like, when you hear that statistic, I'm like, yeah, that actually, like, that sounds pretty accurate. With even just the smaller sample size, I'm sure, than the national report that you had read. So I feel like we're kind of a microcosm of that statistic.
Yeah, I was thinking that you might be a microcosm of that statistic. So thank you for speaking more detail about that. I do want to say before we continue, I'd be remiss to share some context for why we're having this conversation today. So this is the second episode in a series called Path Carvers, not Pathfinders, but Path Carvers, that helps explore how students are thinking about their lives after graduation, whether that be students transitioning from high school to career or high school to college, or students that are transitioning from college to career or college to graduate program. And in the first installment, so the first episode, we talked to Jamar Root, who is an expert in middle school and high school career navigation, right? Spoken to over 40,000 students just this year in 2024, was able to share a lot of perspective around K through 12, but this is going to be a mostly higher ed conversation today. So this is my bag, right? Because I work in higher ed. I'm at Georgetown University, so I'm a, really be locked into this discussion. And as we continue, I would love to hear you speak more to where the engineering workforce is right now. I'm sure as a career specialist in your own right, there's a lot of research or reading that you have to do just on the field of engineering. I heard you speak a little bit to that in your first response, but talk to me a little bit more about what the prospects look like for students after graduation in engineering. Are they having a tough time right now compared to 10 years ago, compared to 5 years ago? Kind of how, what options do students have, and how do the changes in the engineering field impact how you advise students? I guess that's my main question. Like, how do the changes in the job market affect how you advise students as a career professional?
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful question. And I'll say that the cool thing about working with the students that I do at Penn is they're also always teaching me and teaching us about the market. What better people than those who are actually in the market and going through these job search processes than for them to come back and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. So what I actually do is I anecdotally am collecting these trends almost in my head a little bit when I'm having these conversations with students. I will say that when we look at tech specifically, I'm sure there's been a lot of reading for a lot of folks who may or may not be familiar with some of the large big tech layoffs. You think of, the Metas of the world, Google, the Tesla, Twitter or X, Twitter. Those are areas where students have voiced concern. I don't know what that future would look like for me, in tech. I'm interested in tech, but what does that prospect look like? And because of that prospect, I am wondering if that kind of informs what your first question was of, does that encourage them to open their minds a little bit? And to your path carver question, are they trying to carve their own path into different fields, leaving the door open for other options just in case something weren't to work out in this kind of initial field of study that they are pursuing during their time? And It really does depend, I think, on different areas of engineering. I know that there are a lot of software engineers in general is quite popular, but then I also have students who are working in mechanical engineering, and I have students that are in electrical systems engineering, and so it's really quite unique, and that's why I love doing what I do, because each student's case is just a little bit different. I will say that I have worked with a lot of students that are landing jobs in the engineering industry as well, and are quite happy with those. My favorite appointments that I do are offer negotiation appointments, because that means it's been a culmination of the work that we've done. Maybe I've worked with that student since building out their resume, and then they got an interview, and I practice with them and mock the interview, and then we talk about networking, and then all of a sudden it comes to fruition of them getting that offer letter. I had two offer negotiation appointments earlier today, actually, and those are my favorite because those are the happy times, and really what we work for. So I would say the prospect of the engineering field is still there, strong. I think in order to combat some of like those large tech layoffs or bigger questions, AI is a topic that has come up for a lot of conversation too. What does my role look like as AI continues to develop? Is my role even going to be necessary in 10 years because of AI? I'm not sure that we're all prepared to answer what those questions look like just yet. But I will say that Penn has acted in a way where there's actually going to be this fall, there is going to be a degree program in AI, specifically in the School of Engineering and Applied Science. So I think that's a really unique opportunity for students who are interested in pursuing that field. So we always say, and we hear, engineers are inventing the future. That is a constant way, and that's something that the dean of engineering frequently does share as well. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. He says that quite frequently, and it's always something that I think resonates with both me, but also our students.
And I will admit, perhaps this practice that I have is really nerdy, but I'm looking at course catalogs at universities all the time because I'm always interested in being like, okay, what is X university going to offer for their students in the fall? All this stuff is changing. It is happy. I'm happy to hear that Penn is taking AI seriously and actually, developing an entire course for students. I know some universities are, developing entire, like you said, degree programs and curriculums for students around AI. And so that seems like a really positive direction that universities are going into. Whether you like it or not, it's here, right?
Yeah.
And so we got to learn about it. And I think there's even space for a diversity of thought around it. And some students and most likely some educators aren't that crazy about AI, but at least preparing them with the opportunity to explore it in an academic context is really important. So yeah.
No.
And I will say too, you brought up the salary negotiation conversation, or like the offer letter negotiation conversations. I know you see a lot of international students. Is that concept of navigating, not necessarily navigating, but negotiating an offer letter, is that a new concept to them? Are a lot of international students familiar with that practice in different countries? Would just love to kind of hear what how students are responding to that, because I feel like that would be like a particularly American or even like Western idea of like you being offered a salary and being like, nope, I'm not good with this. Let's negotiate a little bit further. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in some cases it certainly can be a newer concept, which I always see that as an opportunity to help them along in that process. And like I said, a lot of it's such an individual student to student basis. I will say that the questions do come up a little bit more of like, oh, like is this okay? Is it okay to follow up with somebody after that interview? This is what a thank you note might look like. And again, that might be something that's very an American Western culture type thing, to follow up with a thank you note or reach back out. So kind of just giving that assurance that it is okay to do those things, and making sure that I'm able to provide that information so that they can have the most successful interview process and job search process as possible is always my goal. So if that means having to, give that extra assurance, hey, it's okay to do this. Let's talk about how we can, write to them professionally. When you get them on the phone, this is how we're going to maybe structure our conversation a little bit. It's okay to say these things, and just being that person to kind of take any of that weight or pressure off their shoulders. That's always my go-to. If I'm able to do that for a student in any ways, and especially as something that does weigh on them as much as an offer letter, I love to be able to do that. So I will say it is a conversation that I have, but not even just international students. Honestly, Jordan, I'm working with obviously domestic students here in the U.S. as well. And even they are not always, sure as additionally, like how to navigate those conversations. So the whole concept, I don't know if it's like a generational thing or just, people also, one of the things is probably the number one myth that I hear is, well, if I try to negotiate, they're going to pull the offer. I'm not going to have the job anymore, or they're going to think I'm not grateful. And so helping students of all backgrounds navigate that conversation is really important. And I always tell, like, the more practice you get with something like that, hopefully it gets a little bit easier and easier. But even somebody like myself, for every job I've ever had, I've negotiated, and I've been successful sometimes, and other times I haven't been, and that's okay. I always tell students, regardless, you have to ask, because the worst they can say is no. And if they say no, you're in the exact same position that you're in now. So I would say that it's just a conversation for all students that I work with. They're not always 100% sure how to navigate that, what's acceptable, what's professional. And I know that word has a lot of layers to it too, and what that means. But that's how I would answer that.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing is that there are different cultural factors that influence whether students even decide to ask, let alone how they ask or at what time they're asking these different things. And so, I would love to hear what are some of the other cultural factors that impact students as they navigate their careers. Or, well, I guess, but before you answer that, makes me think about how last year's Supreme Court decision around affirmative action has made it more difficult for employers to recruit students from diverse backgrounds. And so, in a lot of cases, it is now up to the student or the job seeker to seek out professional environments that value diversity, that value equity and inclusion. And so, that applies to not only the graduate programs that students are going to be going to next after they graduate, but obviously the employers and the workforce that they'll be going into. And so I would imagine that there has to be some sort of balance between the advising work that you do with students being culturally affirming. You bring a lot of different perspectives that are informed by your previous educational experiences, that are informed by your family traditions, that are informed by your values. If you're mission driven, that's valued by your religion, and like these different things that students are coming in with. But at the same time, there are these cultural, largely Western American expectations of what to do in a job interview, of what to, how to stand out in your first month, right? And so, how do you strike the balance in your work between culturally affirming students, but then also preparing them for what to expect and how to professionally progress in their careers after graduation?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll answer it, with the culturally affirming piece first. I always tell students it's important to be able to work somewhere where you can bring your authentic self to work, right? And I say that with any and all students that are coming to me. I think it's extremely important that you can do that in the work that you do, or you will start to experience, even further imposter syndrome, which we all kind of deal with on some level to begin anyway. So I think that there's a difference between, culturally affirming and letting them bring their authentic self to work, but then also just coaching them and having them prepared. Um, and when I say them, I mean, the students that I'm working with. And I think I find myself asking a lot of questions in my work. I think maybe when people envision career counseling or advising or coaching, they think that it's more of just like me telling or talking at students. We have 30-minute appointment blocks. I really like to have the students do most of that talking. I might be driving the conversation with my questions, but by asking the questions and giving them the floor to answer, I know where I need to fill in some gaps, or like I said, maybe educate them on what it might look like to stand out in an interview, or how you should, be in an interview. And the issue is sometimes students, I think, come with these preconceived notions of what they heard from their friends, maybe what they did hear from family before. Oh, this is how it was, when I interviewed. And so sometimes I have to do a little work on the front end of breaking down some maybe either fears or myths, or things that they're thinking might be barriers in this process, and say, oh, well, actually there's not too much of that anymore, or this is a generally accepted practice now. Let's talk about how we can implement that, into your interview, into your follow-up. um, so I think there needs to be a balance in all the work that I do. I can't be one way or the other. I think it really holds me accountable when I'm working with students, which is important as well. And so if you're able to strike the balance of culturally affirming, and like you said, that's all students. So whether that's an international student, whether that's a domestic student, whether that's a student that identifies in FIGLI, which is FGLI, which stands for first generation low income students, people are coming from all different backgrounds, and it's my job to make sure that there is information is accessible for whoever needs it and with whatever point they're coming to me with. So some people that needs to be ratcheted up for, others they might have an understanding of what that looks like. So that's why I have to ask questions, because I need to know what the starting point is in order to best serve the student.
Yeah, I love that approach. And I appreciate you bringing up the fact that students and parents are a big influence. I actually took some time to read through the University of Penn's career website, doing some research for the pod. And I have this specific quote, and I'm going to read it verbatim because I think it surfaces a lot for me. One of the first lines on the parent page, Penn has a parent page on the career services website, which I find fascinating because it speaks to the need to speak to parents in a particular way. And I know that not just career services websites, but university websites are trying to do a lot when it reaches out to parents, because our higher ed institutions are obviously trying to recruit our students as well as support them. So this quote says, quote, "As we know from countless career advising sessions, your opinion and approval matters tremendously." This is not talking to the students, unquote. This is talking to the parents, right? So it's already asserting that like parents play a pivotal role in this, whether they should or not, right? It's just kind of naming the fact. And so how I almost feel like universities, in a way, to provide more resources to the communities that they surround in order to better support students, there needs to be some sort of workshop or offering from parents around career navigation, outside of the sense of like, I know universities do things for parents during orientation while they're on campus and things like that, but to what extent do you see parental influences impact how the students you see navigate their careers? Like, what are the ways that parents influence the students that you see, and kind of what is the process for talking students through that?
Yeah, it definitely can be a little bit of, I think, a difficult conversation, just to be honest with you, because students are typically pretty upfront in my experience with saying like, hey, like these are some expectations that have been laid out for me, that this is why this has to be my path, right? Or I'll hear some students say, I'm not necessarily super passionate about this, I would actually rather do X, but this is the path that I have to go down. A lot of time there might be financial support pressure coming in. Maybe their parents are fully funding their experience, so then they feel that additional support, or they feel like it might be a difficult conversation to say, hey, mom and dad, or hey, grandma and grandpa, or whoever is supporting, from a familial perspective or legal guardianship of supporting their education, and having that difficult conversation of, I'm not sure that I want to go into this thing. And I feel like more often than not, when I would rather go into this thing, that always ends up being an industry that's either labeled as, or just objectively pays less or is less financially stable. So they're a little bit nervous about bringing up that conversation. We sit in a really tough position in the middle, because my job is to serve students, is to make sure that they are happy with their career choices, that they're confident in what they're doing with themselves. And we have to toe that line of not overstepping the boundary of familial relationships and dynamics. And it's really not, our purview to get into all of that. It's okay to hear those things, but we never want to be in a position where we're saying, oh, you should, go against what your parents are saying, or you should go against, you need to do X, Y, and Z. Again, a lot of questions that I'm asking are just to kind of probe that curiosity. Very rarely in any of the work that I do am I telling students, you must do this. I actually don't think I use that language ever. I'm saying this is something that you should consider. This is a way that I would advise maybe thinking about this. But at the end of the day, and this will lead into the other part of your question, we are structuring our work to give students that autonomy to make those decisions. Part of working in higher ed and developing students is to create contributing members to society, right? I think that's why a lot of people in this work do what they do. I know I'm driven by that, knowing that I'm directly influencing and impacting people's futures in that way. And so if I can get them to think about those conversations, which are difficult, or just maybe if they need some encouragement, that it is okay to maybe have that conversation. But again, the autonomy for them to think about it. And that kind of leads into the parent. Like, I'm not sure what responsibility universities do have to put on like a parent workshop or something like that. And, then you can get into a whole bunch of, other legalities of reaching out, and when parents are calling universities about, their student and things like that, and what you're allowed to say and not say. So it gets a little bit, I think, of a gray area, just to be honest with you. So I'm not sure what role universities would have in educating the parents on the career thing, but if we can make the commitment of saying the quote that you read, just putting out there that their support does mean a lot to any students. I think, they are working so hard to, maybe whether there's pressure that's been said aloud, or if it's just perceived pressure that they have put on themselves for what they think their family wants them to do. Hearing those words of affirmation of like, you're doing a great job, or that's awesome, you landed that internship, or I can't believe you had 4 interviews for 4 different companies. That's amazing. Or, yeah, I encourage you to go think broadly about your career. I think those are some of the things that we want to say. And you mentioned about getting a chance to speak with parents at orientation and things like that. I think our leadership in our office does a good job of talking about what our mission is. And we kind of have on our website there about, making students' dreams and kind of like turning them into realities and helping them get there along the way with various steps, from the very first time we see you with a resume to, coaching you up at the very end, and hopefully attending a bunch of our programs in between, just to create that holistic career experience. That's ultimately what it's all about.
Man, you are a true professional. You unpacked and parsed out that biased, impassioned runway that I gave you and added some nuance to it that was needed. So I appreciate that answer. Before we go, I want to get into some of the specific theories and frameworks that you give to students as a career counselor. There's a ton of different frameworks out there. You might be familiar with Ikigai. You might be familiar with design thinking and how folks use design thinking for career navigation. What are some of your go-to theories and frameworks that you use at your center to guide students through that process?
Yeah, I would say that I'm probably more of like a practical approach framework kind of person, as opposed to like a by the book theorize, just because, and I've mentioned this, I feel like maybe in 2 or 3 different answers now, but the work I do with student to student is so different that I can't just like apply like this sticker of like a theory or, a framework. I think I might use a lot of similar language time to time, depending on where students are in their journey. But I think a framework that I like to use, and again, it depends what kind of appointment it is, right? Like we have some very standardized, resume templates, for example. So if we count that as a framework, right, that we are trying to get students started with and how to think about their resume. Other frameworks that are used, one that I use a lot and one that I'm really passionate about is networking. And as far as what that framework looks like for students, I like to give students love actionable steps, right? And so if I can help them achieve that through a couple of different things about how to connect with somebody, or how to find somebody on LinkedIn, or, you say you want to be a systems engineer at X company. Why don't we look up that company on LinkedIn? Let's see if there's any alums from Penn that are working at that company in that role. Now let's talk about how we can craft a message so you can have an opportunity to speak with them. So I would consider, I have 2 either I don't want to say self-design because I'm not the first person to come up with them, but I think 2 go-to networking frameworks that I use. And I call them either day-to-day networking, or I call them application pusher or app pusher networking. And the short version of the difference of those 2 things is the day-to-day networking is we're going to find somebody that you can reach out to because they are in a role that you can see yourself in, right? Like you can see yourself being that person in 3 years. Let's actually hear what their day-to-day work looks like. I like to say, let's get beyond the job description, right? Let's get into it. What is your work going to actually look like? Can you see yourself doing that work? There's no better way than to talk to somebody who's doing that work. So that's kind of the short version of the day-to-day networking. And then the app pusher networking is when we want to come across somebody that can take our application, and I'm reaching up to the cloud, right, of where all applications go, and can snatch your application out and get it in front of eyes of somebody to see it. So this looks like campus recruiters. Some companies call them university recruiters. And those roles are people that are designed and have certain universities and colleges attached to their territory, for lack of a better word, right? And their whole job is, or not the whole job, but a main part of that job is to create a pipeline, of those students from those universities. So how can we find those folks, right? How can we, sometimes we'll go through, I like to work through case studies and exercises with students in real time. I'll pull up my LinkedIn, I'll share my screen. I'm like, give me your dream company. And I show them just how attainable that networking framework can be, because I think the notion of networking is it has to be already established, or if your family isn't, quote, well connected, or if you don't have, and I hear that a lot from students, like, my parents aren't super well connected, or my parents don't have really high level like jobs where they know all these people. And I'm like, we all have access to LinkedIn, which has millions and hundreds of millions of users, right? And so we all have that same access to them, which is why I like to encourage folks to kind of use those networking frameworks. And all this kind of goes into setting up their profile to begin with, so that they can feel confident when they're given some of those networking tips too. So yeah, those are my two favorite frameworks in the realm of networking and job search in general. Day-to-day networking, I call it, and then like an app pusher, someone that can move your application along in the process and get you into that interview. I'm consistently saying, and this is just my opinion, there's people that might disagree, but I think the most challenging part of the job search is getting into the interview room, like getting over that first hurdle of having your resume selected from however many applicants. And once we get over that first hurdle, I can prepare you for the interview. We can mock the interview. We can come up with questions. Your sphere of control, you have so much more control once you're in the interview as you do kind of like before. So the number of steps we have to take to get there, I think a lot of that work comes on the front end.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, because the getting in the interview room is so binary. It's like a yes or a no. And a lot of times it's AI that's making these decisions nowadays, right? And they have to get through these technological hurdles of like, okay, the keywords to put in the resume. And I'm sure you know about all those systems. But once they actually get in the interview room, there are so many different ways to get the job or even not get the job, because the
Yeah.
interview is just as much about you and what you need as an applicant as it is the job that you're trying to apply for. You know what I'm saying? So that makes a ton of sense to me. And as we wrap up here, big things that I'm taking away: day-to-day networking versus app pusher networking. That makes I had never heard that delineation before, so that was really helpful for me to hear. And then also validating the cultural factors that are influencing students' decisions and not dismissing them, or not telling students that they need to resist or reject them, but asking students the right questions to help them process it and to see their priorities play out in real time, right? And have students develop a level of agency to be able to make those decisions on their own. So that was also crystal clear for me. Dustin, thank you so much for your time, man. This is a lovely conversation. I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you, reaching out and asking me to be on the pod. I think what you're doing and the work you're doing is so important, and the name helps students win. That's really, if I think about it, that's what I'm trying to do at the end of the day. And I think I'm really lucky to work with colleagues that are doing the exact same thing. I really consider myself a student advocate. So to be on a platform that certainly has that at the forefront of the purpose, I'm privileged to be here, and I appreciate you having me on.
Man, I greatly appreciate that. Look, if you are listening to the show, leave a review. 5 stars only. Y'all know what the deal is. 5 stars only. Share this with a fellow learner. If you're on YouTube, make sure you like this video. Share it with somebody that you know. This has been Help Students Win. My name is Jordan Davis. Again, Path Carvers running throughout the entire summer. So if you're a career counselor, if you're an educator, if you're an administrator, stay locked in with us. Stay cool. Find some water, find some beach, find some sand somewhere. If you like going into the woods, find some trees, whatever makes you happy, and make sure that we are prepared to help our students win this upcoming school year. My name is Jordan Davis, and I'll talk to y'all on the next episode. Take care.